podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This week, I'm with John Hurd, who is founding member of a group called Newcastle United Supporters Against Sportswashing. It's obviously kind of timely conversation with things heating up in the bid for Manchester United right now. John, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me.
I'd kind of come across your profile on Twitter because I'd spotted some of your messages talking about the takeover at Newcastle and seen the pylon that you have managed to gain as a result of that, which is unsurprising, and I thought we could get into some of the topics. But first, tell us about yourself and about the group and why you have started this, probably against the many headwinds given what came before and since.
Well, despite what the detractors say on Twitter, I'm a lifelong Newcastle fan. You can probably hear from my accent. I haven't got a Sunderland accent at all. In fact, I've got a Felon accent. I'm from Gateshead, the other side of the river. But all my life I've been a Newcastle fan. And I've travelled around a bit. I used to follow Newcastle, all the away matches in the 80s. I was working in London. And, it's part of your life, part of the culture.
Right.
It's obviously the same for Man United fans as well. And I've been involved, in another life, ages ago with the founding of Reclaim the Game. I was involved around the Hillsborough stuff because I was working for the Young Socialists, Labour Party Young Socialists at the time. And we were involved in the campaign against ID cards. Remember?
Yes, yeah.
Probably too young to be able, but Thatcher tried to bring them in, but also the Hillsborough stuff as well. And that sort of was my formation of politics and football, And one of the things I was always into was having greater ownership for fans, And basically, at the end of the day, I'm in favour of fan ownership of clubs, And this pamphlet that John Reid, who's a QPR fan, actually, it's quite a famous pamphlet, but he predicted, right from we predicted, right in the early 90s, that and I'm sorry to say this, but when Manchester United, became predominant with the big backers and all that sort of stuff in the formation of the Premier League, it was going to be the start of a slippery slope. And this is where we've ended up.
Yes.
It's, 2, possibly 3 dictatorships owning football clubs. Well, anyway, going to how we set the campaign up is that, I was outraged, absolutely outraged that Premier League okayed the deal. And also, when I saw the reaction of the Newcastle fans, I sort of understood it. On the one hand, I understood they were celebrating, that Ashley had gone.
Yes.
In fact, I was involved with other fans. We were involved in the Ashley campaigns. I actually remember linking up with the trade unions. And they had a big banner there, Sports Direct Shame. It was about the 0-hour contracts and all that sort of stuff. So I was like, bloody hell, it's like from the frying pan into the fire. Because if we can campaign against Ashley, what he was doing to his workers, come on.
It should be easy to campaign against murderers too.
So, what happened was, it's actually quite easy now to link up with people. Met a guy called Dan who set up No Saudi Tune. Which is the Twitter account. I did stuff on Facebook and then we linked up. But it was during the pandemic. And what happened was it was harder, obviously to link up with people. But we had a meeting, and the first meeting, I had quite a few people. It was an online meeting. We had a few people speaking. And then we started to build the Twitter account. It was, had a few hundred and all that sort of stuff. But we started putting out, quite a strong message that we didn't want a dictatorship taking over the club. And then we had a meeting in Newcastle, which was a guy from Trade, Andrew Feinstein, who was an Arsenal fan. He got involved with it and he said, I'll come and speak about Yemen, what the Saudis are doing there. We got more people with that. And then we got some sort of key people got involved from that. And then when it was coming up to the anniversary, we were trying really hard to get a profile on Tyneside. But the Evening Chronicle, which is the local paper, and the radio, BBC Radio Newcastle, they weren't interested. It was, you could see that it was almost like they had a giant megaphone, pumping out propaganda. Oh, everything's great, these orders and all that sort of stuff. And it was absolutely woeful, it was terrible. But anyway, because of the anniversary, they got in touch with the Chronicle. We did an interview with them, and then we were on Radio Newcastle. And then it started to really take off, And so the important thing that happened to us as well, a Saudi human rights group got in touch with them.
Okay.
And they basically, I can't say that much about them, can't use names and all that,
yes,
because
course,
people are under threat and all that sort of stuff. But they got in touch with us based in, a European country. And they said, look, we've been watching what you've been doing. We really like it. And we said, we had a meeting with this guy, we'll call him, Ali, Mr. Ali. And he it was amazing, actually, what he said. He said, I was a Newcastle fan. And he goes, I said, Alan Shearer was my hero.
Right.
And he said, I just couldn't believe when the regime took over, that people were dressing up in Arab gear. And so we were like all the exiles, people in Saudi Arabia who are fighting for human rights. You just couldn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we thought that, English people, British people would have a different. And so anyway, we explained the situation to him and all that. And he said, what you've got to do is you've got to highlight individual cases.
Yes.
You've got to highlight the women who have been in prison.
Humanize it.
Salma al-Shabaab and Noor al-Qatani, and these nine now, but young guys. So we did a protest outside the ground. It was when we played Chelsea. And this was a real lesson about how you get a campaign established, because the Saudi bots have got like a troll farm, haven't they? Bot farm in Riyadh, and they started, and they did things like, who are you? Where do you live?
Yeah.
You're not a Newcastle fan. They started the stuff, you're all Sunderland fans. Now they say we're all Manchester United fans as well. That's another thing. It's pretty funny. And anyway, they started that, and we got physical threats. They actually said, if you come, we're going to do this to you. We're going to do that. So we put a statement out and we said, look, we think the vast majority of Newcastle fans will respect our right to protest. And that's the way it was. We said it was going to be a silent protest, but actually it turned out we're talking to loads of people. People were coming up and saying, look, I don't totally agree with you, but, you've got the right to do that. But also the final thing was like that turning point, talking to the Saudis, they started giving them more information. And one of the guys in the campaign, guy who writes a lot of the articles and that on the website, he just said he was a season ticket holder. And he said, in all good conscience, he said, I can't go anymore. I can't go. When I hear the stories of what's happening to you, and all that sort of stuff, he said, just can't do it. And so we don't say to Newcastle fans, boycott. We don't say that. We're not saying that.
Because it's hard to tell a fan how to support, isn't it? Yeah.
Of course, some people can't go. But one of the things, the bottom line that we're saying is we're saying to Newcastle United Supporters Trust, we're saying to War Flags, we're saying to the fanzines, we're saying to them, you said before the takeover that you would hold the owners to account. Well, come on, do it. What about a banner in the ground? At least Man United fans have had a banner against that. There should be some banners calling for human rights in Saudi Arabia. That's the least they can do,
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's so much easier to build a campaign when the owners are failing. So in the case of Newcastle, Mike Ashley, in the case of United, the Glazers, and even then it's been hard at United. But you see the culmination now of years and years of protests and trying to build that campaign to get a solid message against those owners. When it comes to a state, that's very different, because the propaganda machine kicks into action, as you said, the bot farms, the PR, the money. And I imagine for you, getting your message to break through that human rights mean something in the face of now on the field success and off the field growth is particularly difficult. Yeah.
Well, one of the guys who wrote an article for we've actually had 2 editions of a fanzine.
Yeah, it's very good, by the way. Yeah.
Hailstones in the Desert. The reason why it's called that is quite, you'll probably think this is, quite ironic, but when we started, it was really funny because they said, these are all snowflakes. So like 2 things came out. He said, if you're in favor of human rights, you're a Sunderland fan or a snowflake. So he said, to stand up for human rights in Saudi Arabia, you're not a snowflake. You're a hailstone in the desert.
Right.
You're hard people, really, really hard. Anyway, one of the guys in the campaign wrote an article. He's 50 odd years, and he said, I've seen everything. And he said, look, but I can see what's happening. He said, basically, the Saudis have got, money's no object. I think they've paid an American payoff almost $1 million, right? Mm-hmm. So there's loads of things they're doing with that, But he said, but what they're going to do is they're going to try and neutralize the majority of fans, and they'll do that, but with buying the players and hopefully having a bit of success and all that. He says, but watch it, mark my words. He says they'll get a layer of fans who are prepared to defend them, And it's true.
Yes,
Not all the people, if you follow the Twitter account, not all the people who are attacking us and praising the Saudis are Saudi bots. Some of them are Newcastle fans. Now, the thing is, as we're in a minority. We know that and we admit it. We're a minority, but we can't allow that. You can't, Newcastle, like Manchester, it's a working class area, massive, labour movement, trade union traditions. How do we allow, that to be a normal thing? So basically, we've been pushing back against the normalisation, of having a dictatorship in a club, which is obviously didn't happen in Man City. I think some people tried, but perhaps people didn't know as much then.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. No, I think fans have been educated, but it's very hard for fans not to be deeply wedded to the emotional thing, which is why football is so powerful and why it's such a great tool for sport washing. And we can get into what sport washing means as well. But at City, what happened was obviously they weaponised the fans, and that was a deliberate part of the strategy. And it's been very interesting watching United fans over the years, because the initial reaction was there's lots of money, that's kind of unfair. And then, of course, people get more engaged with what it's really about and more deeply into the topic and understand what states owning clubs really means. And so United fans have been educated, but I still see a very small number of United fans pushing back against potential Qatari ownership, because it's the fastest route to success. And this is why sport washing works and why you're in such a difficult position, I think, pushing back against the Newcastle owners.
During the campaign, it's more than a year now. And, obviously you learn things, you realize, how to approach people, what kind of things to say and all that. And at the beginning, a lot of the Newcastle fans were being, had a bit of a persecution complex, in saying that, everyone's against it. We explained, when you talk to other fans, people are not against Newcastle fans. People, they used to be the second favourite club, during the Keegan time and all that. So what it is a lot of fans, I wouldn't say, I'm not talking about Man United fans because you've got your own fight going on at the moment, but I think fans of the other 17 clubs, probably, if you ask them, they say, no, we're totally against states owning clubs and we support human rights. And so one of the things we've sort of raised with Newcastle fans is not to get used to this money, because the tap's not going to be on forever. Loads of reasons. One reason is what's happened today with the tightening up of the question of human rights.
Yes,
which we can go into later. But the other factor is that what's in front of her. It's not just about Newcastle. It's not just about Manchester City. Basically, what you've got is if Qatar are allowed to take over Manchester United, you've got to have a Middle East football arms race. Sure. And the thing is, the other clubs, even the big business who own the other clubs, are going to think, well, what the hell is going to happen to us? Because the state has bottomless resources. It'll completely go skew with the Premier League, but also it's going to affect La Liga. It's going to affect the Italian football, German football, because any agent can say, well, we'll go to Newcastle, we'll go to Manchester United, because the wages. The thing is, that people don't realise the effect. So the thing is, we think, the Premier League obviously under pressure from our, well, not just our campaign, but loads of campaigns, Amnesty and the rest of it. And they've put this clause in, it's a bit of a tightening up. But the other thing as well, they're probably thinking, well, what's going to happen to football? They've looked at it. And, obviously we're going to surmise things and think about that. But, it's typical, short-term thinking from the Tories. Boris Johnson got a call from his mate, Mohammed bin Bonestock, said, lent on him. He said, you got to push this through. Perhaps the Premier League were against it. Perhaps they were against it, But in the end, it went through. Yes. And now look at the consequences. It's being constant for a year.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting you brought up the regulations being tightened today, but really the tightening. So what's happened? The Premier League has adopted a new owners and directors test, which includes some provisions around the global human rights sanctions list, right? So there's basically the Premier League saying, look, we're not going to deal with that issue, we're going to leave it to government. And the global human rights sanctions list, as adopted in 2020, by the way, is basically the regimes that are currently not favourite of the UK government. So Afghanistan, Mauritania, a few others. There's a few terrorists on that list. But Mohammed bin Salman and his cronies are not. Neither are the Qataris, both actually good friends with the UK government. And I think far from depoliticising ownership, it makes it very political, because it says that the Premier League is completely open to whoever you are, as long as the UK government are okay with it. The UK government foreign policy is very tied up with Qatar because of liquid and natural gas. And so if the Qataris win the bidding, if they decide they wish to win the bidding, because, as you said, state wealth will always trump private wealth, then it's going to be fine with the UK government. That won't be the block.
Yeah, well, these are just like initial thoughts, and obviously everyone who's involved in these campaigns is going to be thinking about what the Premier League's done. But think about it. They had that meeting last week where Richard Masters, who was are we investigating or are we not investigating the Saudis? Obviously, they're under a bit of pressure. Now, the thing is, I think you've got to take the bigger picture, right? In the court of football fan opinion, like I said before, majority of football fans don't want states and they don't want human rights abusing dictatorships running our football clubs, okay? And there's like a fine sort of balance that the Premier League got to do, because they want the money, don't they? They want the money for them. Yep. But there's also one of the things that they've said is that there'll be a review every year of or periodically of who the owners are. Now we think that it could have gone much further. Like we're going to be linking up with Man United fans actually this weekend before the match. We're going to put out a joint statement. And one of the things that we're saying is that individuals linked to the regimes shouldn't be allowed to own clubs, but also that there has to be something in there about states not owning clubs. And I think there's a lot that football fans can do on that. So our plan, obviously, as I said before, this is a Newcastle campaign, but we've realised that we've got to link up with fans of other clubs. We'll put the football rivalries aside, but think about the future of the game. So one of our things that we're thinking about is that actually get right into all the football supporters associations and saying, get in touch with your representatives, get in touch with your MPs, and demand that states are not allowed to own clubs. And I think there's been a lot of push towards that. And I think we can keep it going. I know some people today are disappointed that it hasn't gone far enough and there's ways to get out of it. But what I'm saying is, in the wider picture, most football fans say, well, these people shouldn't be allowed to. I've noticed today, we put stuff on social media, and loads of the lawyers are coming. They're not lawyers, fans are saying, but it doesn't mean the directors. Well, who cares? It's like anyone involved in a dictatorship who has any position is implicated.
The important thing, and I think you're completely right about this, the distinction in the ownership rules around entities and that question, can you have multiple clubs, is a very similar get out clause to the distinction that the Premier League is making around the owners and directors tests and the global sanctions list. They're basically saying, hey, we're going to punt it to someone else. We're going to kick the can down the road, and we don't want to have to make a decision about this. And part of the reason I think that happened is that although there was apparently some unhappiness amongst Premier League clubs about how the Premier League pushed the Newcastle takeover through, the owners at United, Arsenal, Liverpool, and a number of other clubs would quite like there to be a market to sell to at some point. And so while on the one hand they may say, we're not sure if we want state money competing with us for just the 4 Champions League spots, they would sell in a heartbeat. FSG, the Glazers at United, even the new owners at Chelsea, Clearlake, who will want to get out at some point. West Ham is currently for sale. Everton is most definitely for sale, and so on. They all want an exit for their teams too and their investments. And so this is why the Premier League clubs haven't pushed back against state ownership as well. It
was a unanimous vote today, though, wasn't it? It was a unanimous vote
on taking because it doesn't exclude the owners at City or Newcastle and the prospective owners at Manchester United either.
I'm looking at it now. I've got it in front of us. This is a new disqualifying event for human rights abuses based on global human rights sanctions regulations 2020. Okay, they can say that. Okay, they can say that. But as I say, the average football fan's going to say, we know what Mohammed bin Salman done. We know what the Abu Dhabi dictators have done. We know what they've done in Qatar, and they can try all different ways. We've been approached, and I'm not saying we're going to do this, but we've been approached by lawyers who said, there's some cases here to actually, to take up some actions against them. You had the cup final against you lot, against the cup final, the brother of Mohammed bin Salman sitting in a box with his Newcastle scarf on.
Yep.
Now, this guy, okay, he's known as like the money man for the regime. Okay, it's like the mafia, isn't it? Or the lawyer for the Godfather. How he didn't kill anyone, but he's like, he was actually, giving them their money, that sort of stuff. So, who are these people? There's some of them some regime figures have turned up at St. James's Park. It's been mentioned in the Evening Chronicle, and they haven't got space to say what these people have done.
Yeah.
We've actually had to go away, find out who they are, and say, these people have been, accused of being torturers and all that sort of stuff. So, this idea we're doing well and all that sort of stuff, forget it. We've got to have some ethics and some morals in football. And I think we're at a turning point in football.
I do hope so, yeah. The media state, you mentioned it a couple of times. I do think that's really interesting because they're complicit. Obviously, this is part of the point. You co-opt the media, and that's why buying a football club is so effective as a tool of state propaganda. And what specifically happens, local media particularly want access. And so if Luke Edwards at the Telegraph or George Cullen...
Yes, Culkin, is it? Yeah.
Culkin, sorry, at The Athletic... come out very strongly against the owners, they're going to lose their access. And so they're part of the process and they're a useful tool for the regime. And the same will happen at Manchester United. I mean, in fact, it does already for a different reason with the Glazer family. But if the Qataris take over, no one will want to lose their media access. And so media criticism and media context, which is just as important, will not happen as we'd expect it. So it becomes... people like you and other fans with their own platforms have to speak out for anyone to hear anything, I think.
All we're asking is for the local press to do their job, even if they just followed up on a few things. The interesting thing about that as well, though, I think it's, I don't think there's any conspiracy or anything like that. But money talks, if you listen, you can hear it, And obviously what they're doing is basically there's a lot of largesse, as they call it, going around. But, let's give one example. They've said the Saudis are going to increase the value of the club by 10 times. Okay, so, into the billions or whatever. Okay. No, and there's people think, well, I can get some of that. It's like if that money's around. One thing I've noticed, one of the fanzines is just had a complete revamp. And they're putting out articles, I don't know, twice a day. Before it used to be fans writing it, but now it's loads of, it looks really, it's being revamped. There's loads of podcasts. There's loads of YouTubers. Great. All talking about Newcastle. But they've had 2 trips to Newcastle. They've had 2 trips to Saudi, to Jeddah and to Riyadh. Yeah. And they invited fans there. Fans went. They had a meet and greet and all that sort of stuff. Obviously they know how to do it, and they get people on board, and they say, we're doing this, we're doing that, it's better access and all that sort of stuff. And, during the time of Ashley, the Chronicle was actually banned from the ground because they criticised Ashley. So, if Ashley was, if we criticised Ashley for things he done quite correctly, why aren't they just saying, giving some facts in the paper about the 81 people who were executed before the Chelsea match last season,
What are your thoughts on some of the more prominent Newcastle players? Because Alan Shearer's, by the way, we used to make fun of Alan Shearer on this podcast. United fans like to make fun of Alan Shearer generally for historical reasons.
That's it. Interview's over.
Yeah. Anyway, used to make fun of him. Used to call it Alanicist, terrible pundit. And I felt like he was probably the hardest working pundit in football because he became a very good pundit.
Yeah.
And he very obviously worked at becoming better at that job. But his tendency, and tell me if you think I'm wrong here, after the takeover has been to say, I'll talk about that later. He put out one article in The Athletic saying, I have concerns. and then nothing else since. And he'll like, I'll talk about it later. Not now, we'll talk about it later. And that seems to be his strategy. What do you feel about Newcastle?
Well, we've got into this, and this has been like an ongoing thing. You know that we were approached by the brother of a young Saudi who'd escaped, and his family had been in prison. They were basically holding his brothers hostage and all that. We got him in Morocco and illegally extradited him. So our Saudi friends asked us to do like a campaign. So the brother, this is quite unusual because Saudis have to be really careful, but the brother of the guy thought, 2 of my brothers have already been like imprisoned, so I'm going to speak out. So he wrote a letter and he used his name, and he wrote directly to Eddie Howe. And he asked Eddie Howe, we went to the ground, we read out the letter and all that, and we got a load of stick. They said, how dare you bring Eddie Howe into this? Said, well, he's the manager. He's the coach of the club. And he said, Eddie Howe actually said, right at the beginning, if you ask, he goes, I don't know enough about Saudi Arabia. He said, I'm gonna like do some research on it. I read the Guardian and the Times. Okay, he's been twice. He's visited the country. He's read the newspapers. Can he not make a statement? Okay. Now this young guy said, Ahmed, he said, you think, Mr. Eddie, he said, you think that you can't have an effect? He said, if you said something for my brother, it would have an effect. It would, because they hate bad publicity. Sure. So basically, we said at the cup final, if not now, then when? If you don't speak up now, when everyone in the world's watching, you should have said something, But the same goes for Alan Shearer. Alan Shearer stood up for the free speech, the right to free speech of his mate Gary Lineker. Marvelous solidarity. Same with all the other pundits. Well, loads of workers at the BBC. Fantastic. Free speech is a human right. Now, Salma al-Shabaab, Nora Al-Qahtani have been in prison for 45 and 27 years for tweeting mild criticism. So we've asked periodically Alan Shearer to say something. And loads of fans come in defense, don't bring him into it. He's already said he's against it. He says, but being against it means saying something now when they need your help. These people are asking for help. There's families of other prisoners, young guys who are on death row and that sort of stuff, have got in touch with Messi, they've got in touch with Ronaldo, because, Ronaldo's taking a lot of money. Messi is an ambassador. It's incredible. An ambassador for tourism. And he's got to get millions from them. They brought to them. So why shouldn't Saudis write to Alan Shearer into Eddie Howe? Why not? They said they were going to hold them to account. Why don't they do it? And a lot of fans are quite cynical. Well, I think it's fed by the media. What effect would Alan Shearer have? It would have a massive effect. Well, if he said something, yes. We appeal to him. If you listen to this, please say something. Say something about individual cases. Help them and all that. That it would be a really important thing to do.
If Alan Shearer spoke up or Eddie Howe, it would give a permission structure for other supporters and other prominent Newcastle players, ex-players, players to say something.
Well, it's a player at the moment, isn't it? I don't know if you noticed this, right? But before the England match, Kieran Trippier did an article which appeared in the mag, right? Mm-hmm. And it was great. And he said, this is my personal reason for speaking up in support of the Ukrainian people. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And because he lived he was staying in Ukraine for a little bit. And we thought, great, fantastic. He's got a social conscience. So we said straight away, well, if you can speak up for the Ukrainian people, why not speak up for these young Saudis? Why not speak up for these Saudi women? And again, we've got loads of stick for that. Well, what's the difference? I don't know. Are human rights only for Ukrainians? And they deserve it. Yeah. Yeah. But what about the Saudis?
No, you're totally right.
No coherence in it, Yeah.
No, it's very true. Human rights should be for anyone. And I noticed this myself, actually. We were quite critical on the pod and on our Twitter account about the Qatari World Cup and about the prospective Qatari ownership of United. And the accusations of Islamophobia do come quite thick and fast. Yes. Some driven out of obvious bot farms, but often just ordinary people who've been co-opted. And I do find that kind of interesting because you're obviously going to defend myself. I'm in favor of human rights, guys. It's for everyone, religions, colours, men, women, and beyond that too. And I think that's for me the most troubling aspect of the takeover in that it's going to split and it's going to co-opt my fellow Manchester United fans, and it's going to split the fans, and it's clearly happened at Newcastle too.
But you know what the important thing that I mentioned before about the, Saudi dissidents, or I wouldn't call them dissidents, just normal working class Saudi people, football fans, getting in touch with us. That was very moving. We felt very humbled. They invited us to speak at a human rights conference. And it was incredible. It was like a privilege to hear. But you heard some of the stories and, like absolutely terrible things that goes on. Like these young guys, they were arrested when they were under 18. So that's a minor. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what they do is Mohammed bin Salman said, okay, we're not going to kill, we're not going to execute, we're not going to behead children. So what they do is they arrest them, and it's really cruel. They arrest them and let them go. Then when they get to 18, they arrest them again. Most of them have been tortured into making confessions, in inverted commas. When we raise the cases, the horrible thing is that some fans come and say, oh, they were terrorists, or they were this, they were that, they're rapists. No. Bin Salman is executing or trying to get rid of the opposition. This is the point. This is what they're doing. And so this idea that we can't do anything, we always say to Newcastle fans is, well, look, you listen to Saudi propaganda on Tyneside all the time. Oh, it's a modernizing regime. They're doing this. Look at what they're doing. If they engage with us, they're going to change. Well, they haven't changed one bit. They haven't changed at all. They're actually executing more people now. But the point about the Saudi regime is they're using us. It's not right. That we're using them. They're using Newcastle.
There's an interesting piece in your fanzine they basically said, don't look at what they say, look at what they do. When it came to LGBTQ rights, so Amanda Staveley there with a pride flag, pride scarf, and the same has happened, by the way, with Paris Saint-Germain. I get this pushback. Hey, the Qataris can't be anti-gay. Look at Neymar wearing a rainbow shirt, and contrast that, as you said in your fanzine, with what they actually do. And that seems to me like one of the key things to take away from this. Ignore the propaganda. Look at actually what is happening.
But what other thing is listen to Saudis as well. Listen to Saudis. We had an article in the second fanzine from a Saudi football fan. He was a lawyer, and he was a lawyer for some of these young guys who are on death row. And we're translated from Arabic, and it was like, and I was reading it, and I was thinking, it's like it was so graphic that I thought, will people actually be able to read it? Because it was incredible. And he was talking about them killing kids and all that sort of stuff. So we had a discussion about it, and we sort of we'll put it in in terms that people would understand. But I was thinking, on Tyneside, they listen to the Saudi propaganda. It's time to listen to ordinary Saudis. Mm-hmm. See, the first people who want and need, and we should give the solidarity to, it's not the regime, it's to the Saudi people. Mm-hmm. And this idea that they're all happy with it. This is you asked before about sports washing. There's one aspect which a lot of the whataboutery as well. Yeah. Everybody's talking about it. Well, what we would say about that is, some of the Newcastle fans is, you're talking about it all the time, human rights. Perhaps I said, no, you told us to shut up. When we started the campaign, they said, don't say anything. Alan Shearer shouldn't say anything. Kieran shouldn't say anything. Eddie Howe shouldn't say it. So they tell me to shut up, and then we say, everybody knows about human rights. So they can't have it both ways. Yeah. But the other aspect is sports washing within Saudi Arabia. And this is what people don't realize, is that obviously it's a young country. Millions of young people. They love football. They're mad about the football.
As you saw at the World Cup, yeah.
The reason why they want to own Newcastle is because it's a bit of an arms race between them. Qatar have Paris Saint-Germain, and the Abu Dhabi have got Man City. Saudi Arabia needs a football club as well. But what they can say within the country, look at us. We're at the top table. We've got a Premier League club. And it's for internal. It's for internal
leverage.
Leverage as well. It's not just outside; it's inside as well.
I think it's a really important point. So I think we talked about the education offence, and people have come to understand a small part of what sports washing is. And when I spoke to Amnesty earlier this year, and Fair Square, you might know Nicholas McGinn at Fair Square. One of the important points is it's not just about the reputational thing. It's for internal uses. It's about soft power. It's about there's nothing better for global soft power than the Premier League. I mean, nothing. on the planet is gives you more access than the Premier League. It's about hard power in the case of the Qataris, so the Saudis don't walk into Doha. It's, as they've threatened to do at any moment for the last 30-something years. It's about economic links. It's about diversification. All these things are true at the same time, and that's a very hard message to get across, which I do think you are doing well through your fan team. It's a very nuanced, like, it's a great read, by the way. And I do encourage any listeners to go read it. It's a lesson in, like, how would one build a counterbalance or a counterweight to a potential state ownership of United? It's certainly something I'm thinking about. Because we're all faced with this as fans. Like, what do? Do you just enjoy the fact that, I don't know, Neymar rocks up at United or Mbappe and we should go, hey, isn't this wonderful? Finally, we're going to stick it to City after all these years. Or do we have to go, well, isn't there a price to that?
Yeah. Well, it's just, if you, obviously you've got your team and all that sort of stuff, but it's like, I sometimes think like, Man City fans must be quite lonely, like, because does anyone else celebrate the win?
Well, no one does, and Pep is very frustrated about this, by the way. He complains at many press conferences that they don't get the credit he feels they deserve.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I would say, well, for me, just as an aside, Pep Guardiola, for me, seems like a massive contradictions, because I heard him during the big movement in Catalonia in 2017 that he was like, he came on the news and he like spoke against the brutality of the Spanish National Police, and he was like, brutality and all that, and he's never said anything about Abu Dhabi, so to me it's, these people like Eddie Howe, we can't get into their heads and all that sort of stuff, but I couldn't do it. It just seems so much of a contradiction, But especially when you're speaking out against police brutality in the Spanish state, you don't say anything about what your employers are doing,
No, that's very true. So, what's the next step for your campaign? I mean, you've got some measure of traction, but what's your ultimate goal?
Okay, well, what we think the immediate one is that we're going to put out a joint statement. I don't know when this goes out, but it'll be out before the match on Sunday, and we've linked up with the United Against Sportswashing, a new group of Manchester United fans against the Qatari takeover, and we'll put that out, and there'll be like we'll be doing some interviews and like I said, but basically, we've realised that we have to go beyond Newcastle fans, and we'll continue trying to convince Newcastle fans to speak up. We think, they should, especially the fans groups, fanzines, they should stick to what they said they would do before the takeover and, mention human rights and mention what the Saudi regime's doing. But we think that we've, given the news today, what the Premier League has put out, that we need to look at the bigger picture and say, look, it'll be a movement of fans that'll stop states taking over clubs. It's like a point of inflection, So, I think we've got to, hold them to account on the human rights element. Basically, we're going to get in touch with fans of other clubs, other groups. We're linking up with the Man United fans, as I said already, and then say, start like a campaign to put pressure on the MPs and get them to that committee and say, it needs to be hardened up. But I think this thing about, what's happened today, you've pointed out the drawbacks, it hasn't gone far enough. But like I keep saying, I think you've got to see the wider picture. I think the argument, we are winning the argument. I think that I don't just mean us, our campaign. I think football fans who are against states and in favour of human rights are winning the argument. I think that's clear. So I think we just got to keep going, and have more events, more meetings. I think we're going to try and link up with some MPs who are against, who are in favour of our demands. But it's like one of the things that's come across, and it's in a way it's quite disappointing, but it's something that we've got to try and sort out. But we find it amazing that most of the MPs in the northeastern councillors are Labour. It's incredible, but some of them claim to be left wing. But I haven't heard one of them who've come out and said we shouldn't have a dictatorship running our club. It was, how can you not? Even if one or two came out clearly and said, so what we're going to do, we're not saying that's a substitute for a grassroots campaign, but a grassroots campaign can demand that these representatives who are supposed to be left and socialists should be speaking up for human rights. And they should say that this, the best example that has happened recently, I don't know if you know about this, was incredible, but the Newcastle City Council announced last year that they were breaking links with China. Okay? They had a twin town. And one of the reasons was because of a few reasons, but they said because of human rights abuses, but also because of the torturing the Uyghur people, the Muslim people in there. And they said, that's it, we're breaking, they were making these speeches. And then on the other hand, they've got official relationship with Newcastle United. It's great that the Saudis are there. Who are the biggest torturers in the world at the minute?
I know.
Chinese, the Saudis, come on. So there's got to be coherency on this,
I agree, but councils get co-opted as well. So in Manchester, Manchester City Council, Labour Council, has been cap in hand to the Abu Dhabi government for investment, quote unquote. And there's been significant investment in Manchester, and parts of Manchester that were extremely run down now have brand new buildings all over the place. But that development has come at a price. One is Manchester City Council has clearly been co-opted by the Abu Dhabi royal family, clearly. And two, there's a price to be paid for local people who have seen their rents massively increase as a result of that quote unquote investment. And I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing doesn't happen in Newcastle as well, because it's part of the playbook, which says we'll weaponize fans and we'll weaponize local communities by showing that we give back. Right, look at the investment that's happening, and already those promises have been made in the prospective bid from the Qatari royal family as well, and you can see that it'll happen again.
No, well, we followed that with Manchester, and I remember reading an article. I can't remember the name of it. It was in the Guardian, but he's analysed this investment that they'd supposedly put in.
It's by David Kahn.
For richer people, and it's effective. And I think they'll use the same playbook, but they are using the arguments. They say, "Oh, we're going to invest here." What we would say is, well, why can't we build our own stuff? Why can't we find the money and do it? And also, you're asking about the long term as well. Things change, as well. You can probably tell from what I'm saying that I haven't got much faith in Keir Starmer, in a Labour government. But governments can change, sure. And things. Rules can change as well. But one of the factors that a lot of people don't really understand, it's incredible what's happening in the Middle East. You've got almost like a revolution of women in Iran. Yeah. What, and again, you've got to ask the question, why is Mohammed bin Salman, executing so many people? Why is there so many people in prison? Why are they torturing people? Why are they putting women in prison? Because they fear revolution, Yes. And the thing is, do you think, somebody said to us the other day, do you think like if you had a democratic Qatar, they would spend, I don't know how many millions they spent on Neymar, but do you think like a normal democratic government would be able, was it 400 million? I don't know how much it was. It was a lot. But, it just wouldn't be acceptable, would it?
Yes.
But it's like, no, it's our money. We can spend what we want, which is stolen from the people, obviously. But, this idea, this is going to be like 16 years. It's going to be exactly like in Newcastle. It's going to be like Man City. I don't see it. I think there's loads of things that can change, not least world events as well, and what happens in Saudi Arabia.
Well, that is very true, and it's a good point to end on, because I think world events do drive a lot of this, and we saw change Chelsea, who were owned by a Vladimir Putin-linked oligarch, and we all knew about that, and we all said it, but world events changed what happened there.
So if Abramovich was unfit, why is bin Salman fit? I don't understand that.
Well, this is the contradiction. But the reason why the Premier League have adopted this new standard of being on the global sanctions list is because they don't have to then deal with that problem, and they can leave it to the UK government as a shield. And bin Salman is not on the list because, one, he's as listeners will know, I now live in the US. He has been given, Mohammed bin Salman has been given protection as a head of state. So he's in the free and clear when it comes to chopping up Jamal Khashoggi. And similar things, that shield of government is very important for the Qataris in investing, quote unquote, in the UK, and for the Abu Dhabi regime, and for the Saudis, because, of course, there is links between the two governments. UK weapons and logistics being supplied to wage war in Yemen, for example. So these things are deeply linked, and also very complex to to talk about with fans in social media and to get that nuance across, which is why I was glad we could spend 50 minutes today going into some depth.
So what prediction for Sunday? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we can talk about football. So, yeah, well, it was interesting. I thought Eddie Howe, a very good coach. He's done a great job with Newcastle. It was interesting. I thought how Ten Hag kind of outthought him in the cup final, understood how Newcastle were going to play and played in a very specific way to counteract that. So I'd expect something similar from Ten Hag on Sunday. He's a very, very smart coach. One, by the way, slightly dodgy record on. Anyway, we'll go into that later. But we talked about Mason Greenwood on the last pod and Ten Hag's record with Mark Overmars as well. And misogyny is a hallmark of the Qatari regime. So it's all wrapped up into a single thing. But anyway, Ten Hag, very good coach. I think he'll probably come up with a plan on Sunday. We are missing Casemiro, though, which is a big loss.
Well, you know what I hope? I think, as I say, may the best team win, and failing that, to score a penalty in the last minute, it was an unjust penalty, and in the press conference afterwards say, I support human rights in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
That's what I want. Yeah.
Well, good luck with that one, John. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate your insight into the campaign, and best of luck.
Great. It's a pleasure.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.